Hi class. In this video, I will go through the instructor guidance to clarify some important points. The ones that I'm going to focus on in this video are a couple of ones. I'm going to focus on the relationship between language and all the things that you will be looking into in a conversation, like participants' roles, their social roles, also, which is something very important, the indexicality concept and what it means and how to look into it, and how language can shed light on many things, can shed light on power and solidarity, can shed light on taking stance. Okay, so first of all, we'll be answering and we'll be analyzing two conversations for the discussion post. The external resources that you have in the materials section are very good, and they talk about participants and the types of participants, like speakers. The speaker can be the principal thinker or the principal person with the idea, or it can be the person who wrote it but another person delivers it, or it can be a person who takes action, like in cases of actors and things like that. These are very nicely explained in the external resources, and it's actually, you can find them in the guidance as well. Now, this is the assignment, the post, the prompts, and as we agreed last time, in order to get a distinguished grade, you need to answer all the prompts, demonstrate your understanding of the content material by being, by adding critical thinking, and this can be done through integrating everything that you have learned from the textbook, from the sources, and from or from also your previous courses, and of course personal and professional experience. This gives a lot of depth to your post. And as I mentioned also in my previous video, to get a distinguished grade, you also need to add depth in your responses to your peers. It's not only a matter of I agree or disagree. No, you need to say why you agree or why you disagree. And it's always good to have a question at the end of the post, because or at the end of your response to your peer, because this guarantees a stimulating interaction between you and among all the members of the class. And when I see these questions, I can also jump in and share my experience, or give my point of view. And this is what makes the discussion forum interesting and engaging. So I encourage you all to do that, so that not only to get the distinguished grades in content material and critical thinking, but also in your responses to your peers and in participation. Okay, now these are good questions. And I said, consider the following points in analyzing participants and their roles. As I said, there are types of participants. You can be one of these types, or it might not apply. So it depends. And these are good way of thinking of the interactants, or the people, the addresser or the addressee, the speaker as in the addresser, or the addressee as in a listener, or speaking, or as a listener actually. So we have a speaker who is the addresser, and we have the addressee who is also the listener. And sometimes the roles change. So the listener becomes a speaker and the speaker becomes a listener, and so on. And there is this dynamic interaction between both of them, and they use language, and that language tells us a lot. The language can tell us about power and solidarity. Um, you can show solidarity by showing shared knowledge. Now, shared knowledge and language, they are interrelated. How are they interrelated? We will see in the concept of indexicality that indexicality has two perspectives, a sociolinguistic perspective and a linguistic perspective. From the sociolinguistic perspective, when people use certain language that they share, they show that they affiliate themselves to that group. So every group, every speaking community shares certain ways of saying things. And when speakers of that community use that language, use that register, use that, let's say, jargon, they express their affiliation, and they express that they identify themselves with this group. So we see that language and solidarity are interconnected, and how they are interconnected, they're interconnected and related, and related through the concept of indexicality. Okay. Symmetrical and asymmetrical relationships. Again, language can show that. It can show that through solidarity, and solidarity, for instance, a boss and an employee. You would assume that the relationship will be asymmetrical, but perhaps the boss uses certain language, certain tone of voice, certain body language, intonation, and it comes across as solidarity. So again, we see here the importance of language. Another thing to show a symmetrical relationship is, again, with language. Tone of voice. Let's say someone wants to show that he or she are superior, they may use tone of voice, they may use stress, pitch, body language again, and sometimes certain words. They may use a formal language, a formal register, and these also show if the relationship is symmetrical or asymmetrical, or if the speaker wants to be in an asymmetrical relationship or express superiority. So here is the principle and theory of indexicality. Please go through these points. They are very important, and they are copied from the textbook. But what I want you to know about the principle of indexicality is that if I'm going to check it from a sociolinguistic point of view, I will see that there are certain words, certain language, certain jargon that is used to signify or to signal or to say, well, I belong to this group and I want to be known and I want to be marked as belonging to this group. So here I have summed for you some human interactions that function indexicality. And what do they index? Now, what is the meaning of indexicality? Indexicality, that means words, units that refer to a certain thing. They index something. They tell you something. They let you know that is it. So what are these activities? Engaging in joint discourse activity indexes shared membership. So when people are talking about, let's say, football, okay, this indexes their sharing a membership, a certain membership. Using language in the same way and evaluating others' language in the same way indexes affiliation to a certain group. If I'm going to use slang, or if I'm going to use a certain dialect and a certain accent, I am letting people know I want to be marked as belonging to a certain group. Telling stories, having arguments indexes common affiliation. So if in your conversation people are telling stories, so this indexes common affiliation. And actually storytelling is one of the ways and one of the rhetorical strategies people use. Using certain small words or cliches. And every speaking group has these cliches and certain words. And for example, in the southern part of the USA, excuse my accent, you all maybe, or the accent of the Southerners, and certain words that's used in the dialects of Southerners also mark and give signals that they belong to a certain group. The use of formal versus informal. Some people, when they're talking together, they would rather use formal and they would not use informal, and vice versa, or the country. For instance, I'll give you an example. In some leaders in countries that speak a language that has these two registers, formal and informal, prefer to use the informal language, because using the informal language marks them as leaders that would like to win the hearts and the minds, but the hearts before the minds of their people. Because when you're using informal language, this is a language that's closer to your heart, not a formal language that is rather closer to your mind. So, and there is an example of a leader in the Arab world, Gamal Abdel Nasser, who used informal language in his speeches. And this gave him a lot of charisma. So here we see how the use of register can also mark different, different affiliations, different functions. Okay. The concept of the indexicality also, from a linguistic point of view, you look into certain words, like here, for instance, pronouns, and some other linguistic examples of indexicalities are imperatives, comprehensive checks like, okay, understand, and these aspects can be understood from indexicalities. So the most important thing of the concept of indexicalities is what these units make you understand from the point of view to which group the speakers belong, or to which group the speakers want you to know they belong, this shared knowledge. So this is, if you go through this is the sociolinguistic perspective. Okay, so we have in indexicality two perspectives: the sociolinguistic, which is the shared knowledge, and think of jargon. Okay, if you just think of the word jargon, and people use jargon, that is field dependent, that is job dependent, or jargon that is used among, let's say, your family, or that's very much yours. So just think of that, because it refers and it indexes what the speakers, to who the speakers belong, or what they want others know they belong to, and their affiliation. Okay, now another question I always had when I taught this course is the concept of script or frame. Now, any discourse has a certain script and has a certain frame. And I'll give an example here what the meaning of script or frame. Now, in a telephone conversation, there is a script, there is a frame, there is something, a step, and then another step, and then another step, and then another step. And we are all, and these steps we are agreed upon. We know, and we expect, and we know. So any discourse has that. For instance, if you're writing an academic paper, you know that you need to have an introduction, and you know that at the end of the introduction you need to have you need to state the purpose of the paper, and then after that you need to have certain sections, and the sections need to follow the sequence of things that you mentioned in the introduction. This is a script, and this is agreed upon. This is something that you write, or let's say you say in a speech. You follow that script. The listener expects you to follow that script, because this what makes the communication easier and agreed upon. We don't come up with, we have ideas, we have thoughts that we want to talk about, and we comply, and we abide by what we know from our society, what to follow and how to follow these things. Okay, now here also there are examples for the principle of indexicality. Here are some examples, as I said: slang, certain jargon. Okay, here examples from a purely linguistic perspective, like I, a pronoun, today, tomorrow. These are time words. Or here, this is a place word. Now, they actually, what do they index, these words? These words, these indexes are words that their meaning change. Their meaning changes according to the context that they used in. So, for instance, it can be I, and I talk in the discourse about things that is related to me, I, or this I can be used by you and is used in a different context. So the words in themselves can have different reference based on the context that they're used in. Now, again, stance can be expressed through language. Okay. Now, people take stance towards certain ideas, certain principles, and it shows from their language. It shows from their body language. It shows from their tone of voice if it's a speech. It shows from the use of words. How convinced they are of that principle, or how much they want you to be convinced of that principle. So again, language and stance are interrelated. Okay. Now, when it comes to evaluating a conversation in terms of stance, what is an evaluation in relation to stance taking, and what is its function? Now, you will check and see the person, the function of the language, the function of whatever that discourse is intended for. So is it expressing an opinion? Is it manipulating hearer or reading attitude vis-a-vis a proposition, something like propaganda? Organizing the discourse by making boundaries and highlighting specific significant parts, like, for instance, in writing, you write something, you write an argument, you discuss a point of view, and you discuss a certain point and you argue for it, and you come to a little conclusion, and then you repeat it again. You bring it back again in a different context or a different way, but you're repeating it. So you are stressing on something that is important for you, and you want to convince your reader of your point of view. So again, so this is a strategy actually that you use because you want to convince your reader. Are there certain linguistic forms used in evaluation, such as comparative adjectives? Now, like the parts of speech we did in in week 1, the adjectives. What kind of adjectives are these? Are these adjectives helping or not helping? Is the speaker or the writer using these adjectives to compare things together? Other structures are negations, adverbs of degree, and so on. So these are linguistic forms, purely linguistic units that make you understand and make you discern how the speaker or the writer express his or her stance. Since this is going to be a conversation, then we will be dealing with speakers. So the most important thing in the discussion forum post is when you're analyzing the conversation, you look at the participants' roles. If there are types that you can identify, like let's say the speaker, the principal, or a bystander, or an eavesdropper, or a ratified audience, that means listeners, if it happens, if it's the case, or if it's only two people, addresser and addressee, speaker and listener, and they keep on exchanging their roles. You will also need to look into the indexicality, the concept of indexicality, what language they use to, and what you understand from that. That does that language being used signal their affiliation to certain group? And again, I say, think of the word jargon, shared knowledge, affiliation to a certain speaking group. This is from the perspective of sociolinguistics, but when it comes purely linguistic, is if you would like to go into that and analyze that, then you look into words that change their reference based on the context. Words like pronouns, words of place, words of time, and so on. Script and frame is very important. Everything has a script. Everything has steps, and these steps that from 1 to 2 to 3 and 4 are agreed upon. It's like a scenario. It's like a script that we agree upon and we expect from each other, and it helps in communication. It helps in relaying thoughts and ideas. So when I'm listening to you and you're talking about something, the script is active in my mind. So as a listener, doesn't mean I'm passive. No, I am active. I'm active listening to you, and I'm activating the script that I have, which helps me in understanding and following you, in everything that you say. So, and stance, again, as I said, it is expressed through language, and it can be understood through language, and how the person uses language, the functions, and for what purpose. Stance has more to do with the person's, trying to convince you of something. That person has a stand. It can be for, or it can be against. Okay. When it comes to the assignment, okay, the assignment actually is also in relation to conversational analysis. And this time we will be dealing with Grice's maxims. The book and the external resources talk about them very nicely. So there are 4 of them, and you will need to analyze the script that you choose, the conversation that you choose from the ones that given in the prompt. You will need to check that conversation. It's good to, when you're listening to conversation, it's good to extract 3, 4, 5 lines, transcribe them if you can, because this is going to help you a lot in analyzing the language. And when you find, let's say, a maxim that is violated, you can extract from the conversation the examples, the concrete examples, to show how it's violated. Now, these are the maxims. Okay, please go through them. Now, it's very important. Now, I'm going to take you to the end of the guidance, and I here say, in discussing theories and maxims, make sure you follow this method in reporting and discussing. So for maxims and for theories, you need to cite the scholar. So if it's Grice, you need to cite Grice. You need to put the date. If it's a secondary resource, you say Grice, give the date, reported in Johnston to blah, 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 the date of Johnston, our textbook. So you need to do that. Grice, then the date. And I have that in the formatting document. So you can go there and show and see, and see how it is reported. Grice reported in Johnson, the date, and so on. So it's very important. Grice, date, reported in Johnson, date. It's very important. So you need to cite, you need to cite, you need to cite, you need to cite. Now, this is number 1. Number 2, when you're discussing the maxim, give a definition to the maxim. Say what the maxim is about. Always assume that your reader doesn't know what you're talking about. I'm your instructor. I teach this course. Of course, I know about it. But it's always good to define. And it shows me that you understand what the maxim is about and what it entails. So for instance, if it's a maxim of quantity, what does it say? Be informative, as you need to be, and so on. So these are important. These are very important things. So that goes with the maxim. When it comes to the politeness, there are 2 of them. And they're very important. But the one that we're concerned about and we're going to write about in our assignment papers is layoffs. And layoffs very nicely discussed in the textbook. And these are the things that you will need to look into and apply. Formality, hesitancy, equality. So when the conversation is, when the conversation that you're analyzing, is there formality? Are the people keeping distance? Or the imposing on others? Okay, so it says here, do not impose on others, be sufficiently aloof. So this is a principle. Okay, principle of politeness, do not impose. Hesitancy, deference, allow the addressee options about whether or not to respond or how to respond in a conversation. If I'm thinking of Will Smith's, the prince, the one that about the boy and his father. Did this thing happen? Was there hesitancy, or, or the people give each other, in some instances, whether the addressee and the addresser, the speaker and the listener, that they give options to each other, or they jumped on the conversation with their own words and sayings. Equality, camaraderie, act as if you and the addressee are equal. Okay, this is something that's also related to superiority, symmetrical and asymmetrical relationship, solidarity, and power, and so on. Now, another thing that you need to look into, contextual cues, it's very important, or discourse markers in the assignment. Contextual cues can be body language, can be tone of voice, can be intonation. Discourse markers are words like well, you see, right. These are discourse markers. So these are two things that you can look into. And in fact, when you find them and you read, you go on reading, their things will be you will observe things that will show and illustrate a lot of hidden meanings. So just look at them. So again, contextual clues can be body language, tone of voice, intonation, pitch, stress, and it can also be discourse markers, like those words. Well, you see, I know, right, and so on. Now, when it comes to rhetorical strategies, I would like you to go through this. And I would like you also to see how what the rhetorical strategies you have. If the discourse is emotional or it is logic, and they differ. If the purpose is emotional, that's different from a purpose that is logical. Different strategies. And if you go through these, you will see that the strategies differ. In very shortly, in summary, when you're going to talk about logical things, they're going to be facts, numbers, and so on. Emotional, there'll be opinion, there'll be certain language. Persuasion, how are you going to persuade? You use repetition. Not the same thing, not the same word, but the same concept, the same point, but repeated. Paraphrasing, using certain structures, and these structures will let you know, will let you understand, using certain words. Okay, so please go through that. And when it comes to the verbal act and the performance and the intention, in this way, you're putting everything together that you have done from the discussion forum, from the point of view of the participants, from the point of view of solidarity, from the point of view of taking stands, and so on. And you will be looking at the speaker and the listener. Addresser is the speaker, addressee is the listener, the message, the content, the language, the structure, everything, the contextual cues, because here it's performance, it's how everything is put together for the purpose of a certain message, for the purpose of relaying a certain meaning. Okay, so please go ahead here and read these. Okay, they're giving you also from the textbook what are certain things that make us understand this discourse as a verbal performance. And intentions What was the intention? The intention of the message. Some messages can be promises, apology, order, request, and the interpretation of the listener, of the addressee. How was there a miscommunication? Was the interpretation wrong at someone's, or taken wrongly? So these are very important. And as performance, of course, when it comes to the aesthetic, or the artistic richness, or the artistic evaluation, you see the imagery used. You look for the poetry used. You look for words. You look for structure that enriches the discourse. So this what I can say about this week's discussion post and assignment paper.